Hello everyone, new topic for Online Gaming. We're in rare form today, people. I'm actually recording this thing during the day, so I have natural sunlight coming in. It's a little weird. I never do videos during the day. Anyway, we got one from Ravenheart27. He says, thanks for your commitment to YouTube, blah, blah, blah. I listen to you talk for hours. Thank you, Ravenheart, very much. He says, I wanted to know, what do you feel about DLC has brought to the gaming community and how it will affect us consumers in the long run? For some time now, I've always liked the idea of new content for games, whether it be costumes, new chapters, and side events for games, but lately all DLC for the most part, content nowadays feels like material that should have been in the game at launch. Instead of the marketing of season passes, some of which aren't worth the price, I feel like if the game is close to finishing, they can just add whatever they couldn't finish before release dates as DLC for a quick buck. So Ravenheart27, thank you so much for submitting that topic. I guess I like the way he submitted this topic because it covers a number of things. Because typically, like, a lot of people have said, Ryan, let's talk about DLC or let's talk about season passes. I actually still haven't even really done a full topic on season passes. We touch on DLC every once in a while. But this is also a pretty interesting thing because it's one point of contention that I always have a problem with when it comes to this conversation. And it's the conversation of, full game versus DLC. Oh, they took it out for DLC, and of course the roadmap of season passes with publishers and everything, and how they're trying to make money and whatnot. It's a whole overarching idea, and the one thing that always bothers me about this conversation, at least for a lot of people, and this goes in line with the very much so real thing, whether you like it or not. It's that whole crybaby nonsense that a lot of gamers have. They bitch about everything. They complain about everything. They think they're constantly getting screwed. And they overall have a piss-poor attitude about the games industry and, games being released nowadays. Rightfully so, there's a lot of things in the games industry that aren't great. And there's a lot of practices nowadays that, suck or that aren't great. So for the one thing, it's like, when you're talking about, you feel like games aren't full games anymore, or the DLC that comes after a game, you feel like it should have been in the game to begin with. I mean, this conversation is always so, it's so annoying because we never actually know the scenario of every single game, right? I mean, people always talk about the game isn't completely full, they've purposely removed all these things and whatnot. We don't know that. And it's by a publisher by publisher, developer by developer, game by game basis. I don't know why there's this complete idea out there where it's like every game that comes out that has a season pass is apparently not the full game. Because the very fact that the season pass exists means the full game, the full $60 retail game, is no longer a full $60 game because of the very existence of future content coming out. That's what's really annoying. Because for the most part, nobody can back up those claims. You're not on the development team. You're not on the publisher earnings call. You don't necessarily know all the background conversations that have taken place there. And if we're say judging by the history of the games industry, typically, and this is before DLC, games have always had cut content. Video games for the longest time, developers for the longest time, try to cram a lot into a video game, and they always cut content before the game is released. This is before DLC. So for the longest time, you've never been able to get all the content of a video game that a developer wants to release to you, and that's typically because of deadlines, or maybe the content didn't work out all that much, or they didn't have the money and resources, they didn't have enough people behind them to create the specific level or detail, whatever it is they were trying to do. But pretty much every single video game that comes out since the beginning of time has had a larger amount of content that was supposed to be in it, but at some point things get cut. And again, it's for whatever reason I just mentioned. And so nowadays, because you've got DLC involved, there's this conversation going around where it's like, oh, well, this could have been in the final game, and now they're charging us for it. But we never actually know where that cutoff was, And certainly people can give a number of examples where there was actually some viable evidence to where, okay, the content was on the disc, but they're charging for it. I believe there was a few times of that happening. Sometimes the developer will outright come out and say, yes, we do have a season pass ready, or we have content that we're working on alongside the main game, which people also get very upset about because it's like, oh, well, then why didn't you just include it in the main game, or blah blah blah. And it's like, look, if you don't like it, nobody's forcing you to buy it. But this whole idea of the term full game is also kind of an annoying thing, because when you go out and buy a $60 game, apparently it's just not full because extra paid content exists. That's what's really irritating, at least to me, because there's so many people nowadays are complaining and bitching about every single thing, where it's like, okay, if you don't like it, that's a-okay, but then just don't buy it, because that's just like, because like a few people have often asked me, like, how do you feel about DLC and season passes and all that, and if I mention it in passing, I'm like, oh, I buy it if I see it, I buy it if I think it's worth it. But like, I'll still buy the full game, and guess what? I still play all the content in that video game. And if I'm satisfied, then I'm satisfied. I don't get any more extra shit. If I'm not satisfied, in terms of like, oh, I enjoyed the game, now I want more content, and I feel the season pass or whatever content they're giving is worth it, then I'll go out and buy it. I'm not worried about the fucking ethics of whether the content was purposely cut from the game, or if they're trying to charge me extra for it or anything like that. Maybe I should be concerned, but I don't give a shit, because at the end of the day, I'm gonna choose not to buy it if I don't want it. Or if I do want it, then I'm gonna pay for it. And that's kind of the whole thing about being a consumer. Choose when you want to pay for it, and choose when you don't want to pay for it. These are the business practices that they're putting into their games, and it's ultimately your decision of whether or not you want to be a part of it. But ultimately, what I always get annoyed by is the fact of like the idea of what's full and what's not. You don't know that. There's hardly any complete concrete circumstances where we have viable, like, complete concrete evidence of like the full-on fraud that you're talking about, right? Where the game was purposely like finished early in a sense, and all this content was produced alongside the game, and they purposely take shit out of the game to sell it extra or whatnot. And there's like, come on, dude. And even if that were the case, what was it like? I wasn't even following it this closely, but Star Wars Battlefront was like a big game where that was kind of an issue. It's like, okay, then don't buy it. Then by all means, if that was like really the case of that fraudulence, and you feel like you were that robbed and that annoyed by that scenario, then just don't buy it. Or buy the full game, even though there's extra shit available. You can still buy the actual game, play it to your heart's content, and then get rid of it or do whatever you want with it. You know what I'm saying? And this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. All games before DLC always had content cut from it. So in a sense, now that we have something like DLC, it's often, yes, a benefit to having the existence of downloadable content, because then the game can get, say, released, and then the developer can go back to those assets that they possibly already worked on a little bit, or that idea that they wanted to implement but they couldn't because they didn't have enough time because of the deadline, or again, resources, money, whatever the problem was. DLC gives the developer and publisher the opportunity to revisit it and go, okay, now we can actually release this content that otherwise would have never been seen, say, on PlayStation 2 or Xbox or something, or even further before on PS1 or on 64. Like all the history of games, content does get cut. So DLC, if anything, is often a good opportunity for developers to offer those things. But yes, at the same time, like I mentioned earlier and clearly acknowledged, it does offer some, it does bring forth some negatives, which is that developers can often fall back on DLC, and yes, a lot of developers and publishers are getting very comfortable with falling back on DLC, and I would have to imagine in the development process a lot of times it's like, oh yes, we could do this as DLC, which is like kind of the example of what people are getting at, where they're like, oh my god, this should have been in the final game, but they charged me for DLC instead. It's like, calm the fuck down. Like, if that was the case, what does it matter? Then don't buy it, or buy it if it's worth it. Wait till the price comes down. But that's the case, and I would have to assume more often than not, they make those decisions based on the fact that it'd be easier to do it as DLC at a later date, and not to sort of defend publishers and developers, but certainly this kind of justifying where they're coming from, which is like, games nowadays have stayed the same price for a very long time. They've stayed $60 for almost a decade at this point, and budgets for games are going up. Graphical fidelity is increasing. I mean, games are getting more and more beautiful and pretty. They have big Hollywood actors in these games. I mean, like, they cost an astronomical amount of money to make, and games have stayed the same price for nearly a decade. And they only increased by like $10 from, say, the PS2 and Xbox era, and back then they were, typically about $50. Again, this is going by United States or North America prices, or not Canada. Well, United States, yeah, because Canada's different. But yeah, if you're in the United States, PS2 games, Xbox games, they were like $50, right? A whole PlayStation 3 and 360 Wii generation went by where games were typically $60, and we're still at PS4 and X1, and they're still $60. DLC, season passes, those long-term content things that developers and publishers are doing. That's a way for them to kind of, you know, again, make more money. And it's understandable that they want to make more money. Inflation is a big, very real thing, in life, in the inflation of currency. So the games have stayed the price, but, you know, cost of living and everything has gone up. So yeah, DLC and stuff like that is a way for them to make even more money. So yeah, absolutely, it's probably a part of their like long-term business strategies when they release games, and especially like multiplayer games. I mean, like, you got to figure the developer and publisher want the consumer to like hold on to the game as long as they can, and they want the consumer to be emotionally invested in say the game they release, so that when they release a game, for example Destiny, right, they want you to be emotionally invested into that game. So not only do they have long-term content planned for the game, they want you to keep your copy, they want you to be invested into the universe, and then when they say do more content, you want to buy it. Or when they do a Destiny 2, you want to buy it because you were already so, you know, heatly into that first game. Same thing with like a single player game. Even say more so with a single player game, because, you know, once you finish it, you can pretty much get rid of it and unload it and move on to something else. But it's like, oh no, wait, we do have content coming, so hold on to your copy. Then you get even more invested into that franchise, you get more invested into that story, and then when they do a sequel, they've got all this, you know, content that they did before. People still have their copies or something, or people are just emotionally invested into it, and then they want to buy the sequel and stuff. Again, I'm not really trying to defend them, but like, just look at it from that perspective of like business, and that's kind of why these things happen. But ultimately, it goes back to the beginning of it, which is like, you know, sometimes DLC is very beneficial because content always gets cut. So sometimes you can play stuff that you probably would have never seen to begin with, say if these games were existing on older platforms. Yeah, there's negatives, but again, as a consumer, you kind of got to choose what you want to do with it. You know, typically, consumer choice is a good thing. So I mean, you asked like for the beginning of your thing, well, you were like, how do you feel about how does it affect consumers in the long run, the gaming community? I would have to say it has you know, benefits. It has benefits and it has negatives. I'll stay neutral on that. You know, I've because I know people are super cynical about it and really shitty about it, and like I said, I kind of see that viewpoint because it's, you know, it is pretty expensive. If say you do want to do the $60 game at launch and then say their $50 season pass for all that content, I understand it's a lot of money, but that's just like the way it is, and you gotta, you know, pick your battles. Ravenheart27, thank you for that topic, and thanks to everybody who, you know, often ask about DLC and stuff. You know, we could probably do even more topics regarding it in more specified sections of say the whole conversation, but we covered a lot here, which is good, and this is definitely one of those super sensitive topics. People might not like my opinion here. This video may start to slowly accumulate some dislikes over time. I look back at some old Rod on Gaming episodes, and a lot of them, people just are not happy with like some of the things I have to say. I don't really give a shit because I feel like I'm always staying pretty objective and truthful, but either way, I hope this encouraged any sort of thought-provoking things that you are feeling about, and by all means voice them in the comments, and more importantly, and this is the big one, more importantly, submit topics. Keep submitting topics. I want more of them. He had a good one, you probably got a good one, let me hear it. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.